Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, education, business, news, information, anything that gets our attention, really. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com, joined as always by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I am doing just fine, Jesse. It's a beautiful day outside, and the weekend's coming, although this is actually being first broadcast at the end of the weekend.
Right. We're taping this on Friday. We still have the weekend to look forward to. Those of you listening to it, I hope you made good use of it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we have some things to talk about this week. We have a almost final roster of candidates for city council and mayor races, which we will talk about. A couple of bits of school news, their plan for their Region 5 schools, their plan for how to deal with this new third grade retention law that is taking effect this year. City council discussed a resolution having to do with gun safety just a few weeks after county commission also discussed a resolution having to do with gun safety, but with a bit of a different outcome. And to start us off, I thought we would follow up on something we talked about last week, which was Sheriff Tom Spangler's effort to secure a 30% raise for his officers in the county budget this year. So as we discussed last week, Mayor Glenn Jacobs has presented a county budget of just over $1 billion that does not include a 30% raise for sheriff's officers. It includes a 3% across-the-board raise for all county employees. And then Jacobs said he was willing to add another 5% on top of that for sheriff's officers of captain and below. This is both their jailers and their deputies, if Spangler was willing to give up 58 vacant budgeted positions. Now, Spangler had offered to give up those positions to help ameliorate the budgetary impact of the 30% raise that he wanted. But he spoke to County Commission this past Monday at their monthly work session. He made a big presentation. This one was about a 2-hour conversation between Spangler's presentation and then, back and forth with members of commission. And he basically was making the case that the mayor's proposed budget just does not do enough, is not going to get their salary levels to where they need to be in order to be able to recruit and fill some of these unfilled positions that they have, especially in the jail, but also among their patrol officers. And it was interesting, Scott, because usually when the sheriff appears before county commission, he gets a pretty sympathetic hearing. Commissioners are, that most of them have run on kind of pro-law enforcement, pro-law and order platforms. They will often go out of their way during meetings to say how much they appreciate the sheriff's office and the deputies in particular, and all of the things that they go through and so forth. But Spangler kind of called them out a little bit on that this past week because he said, all of you up here like to tell me that there's no bigger supporter of law enforcement than you. And so here I am.
Okay, let's support us.
Exactly. But he did not get what was an obviously friendly reception because Jacobs has made the argument that this would require a tax increase in order to reach these salary levels that Spangler is talking about. The county, as we have said often, and we will continue saying for the foreseeable future maybe, has not raised taxes since 1999. Jacobs very much has promised both in his first campaign for mayor and his second campaign for mayor, and then sort of at any other opportunity he gets, that he will not raise property taxes. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's just not something that he is going to do. And Spangler at the meeting said that he had done the math and that it would cost about the equivalent of a 7-cent increase in the property tax rate in order to pay the first year's jump in salaries. Be about a $13.5 million increase in the budget, which would be the equivalent of about 7 cents in the property tax rate. The county came back later in the week and said, well, actually, once you add in, and they had their actuary kind of run the numbers for the pension plan, which is especially significant for the sheriff's office because there's several hundred members of the sheriff's office who are still working, who are vested in an old pension plan that has since been closed, but is very generous, and they are due those benefits whenever they retire. If their salaries go up, pensions are pegged to salaries. If their salaries go up, then the county's pension obligation goes up and has to be calculated out over the next 20 years. And basically, the county said that would take an upfront investment of $32 million into the pension system in order to accommodate those future benefits, which would be an additional 15 cents on the tax rate. So altogether, it would be about 22.5 cents on the tax rate, which would be about a 15% increase overall in our current tax rate. And that came after county commissioners had already, at this work session, not been super enthusiastic or receptive to Spangler. And so Scott, it's not looking to me really likely that county commission is going to give the sheriff what he's looking for.
Yeah, it is. As you mentioned at the very first, it's kind of unusual for the sheriff's office to get a cold reception. I mean, just put it bluntly, there are 2,000-3,000 people who are either working for the sheriff's office, married to someone who's working for the sheriff's office, used to work for the sheriff's office, with spouses who used to work for the sheriff of them, and assorted children, cousins, and all. So we've got there, probably upwards of 3,000 people,
which is why it's always been a politically powerful office.
Absolutely, and they tend, you don't want to generalize too much, but they tend to vote fairly consistently in support of the sheriff's office. And so county commissioners count, some better than others perhaps, but they count, and they know that that's a lot of votes. And so for them, but they also apparently think that there are a lot more people out there who don't want to see their property taxes go up. And I can kind of see that. I mean, who does? But there's always been, there's this kind of, and this is a, game. Well, if you say support law enforcement, so put your money where your mouth is, and, people will support it and be okay with the tax increase. That's the same thing the school system did several years ago when Jim McIntyre was still the superintendent, and they did the same thing. Schools are great. Everybody's got, there are 50,000 plus students. That's a lot of people, a lot of parents who vote. We need a tax increase, and if you really support education, you will, vote to increase taxes, and that failed miserably. So,
and as in our current case, in that case, we had a county mayor at that time. It was Tim Burchett who, strongly opposed it. And I think the only times, and we have to go back in ancient history to get to when the county used to sometimes raise its property tax rate. The county raised taxes like 3 times during the 1990s alone, I believe, and 0 times since. But in each of those instances, if you go back and look at them, you will find that it took significant support, not just support, but political strategizing and coalition building by what was then county executive.
Yeah.
They weren't even called county mayors. That's how long it's been since we had a tax increase. No county mayor has ever pushed for a tax increase. They used to be called county executives. But that's what it took. And so the idea that you could sort of bypass the county mayor and go direct to commission. Now, commission can do this. They have the authority. Commission has taxing authority. They can set the budget where they want and set the tax rate to pay for it. But politically, the idea that you can do that without support from the county mayor, it would be difficult, let's say. And so, Spangler, of course, recognizes this. And what he's really been talking about from the start of this budget process is potentially filing a lawsuit, which we talked about last week. It is something he can do. I'm not going to go back into all the details of how that works. We have to wait and see. He can't do that until after commission approves a budget, which their budget vote is set for June 5th. There is the potential for there to be some kind of deal struck between now and then. At Monday's meeting, the most sympathetic voice among the commissioners who spoke was from Commissioner Kyle Ward, who said right up front, I'm not in favor of a tax increase. I'm not going to support something for a tax increase, but I would like to find a way to get your people more money, Sheriff. Is there a percentage that we could talk about that's not 30%, that's maybe more than the 8% that Jacobs has budgeted that could maybe be accommodated in the budget somehow? And so Spangler said after the meeting, he's open to talking to people. We'll see if something comes out of that. There's not a lot of time to try to get something like that done in the next couple of weeks. And it has seemed that Spangler is pretty set on this idea of pursuing a lawsuit. He's been talking about it for months now with county officials. And, if we get to that point, nobody really knows exactly what to expect or what kind of proof or evidence he might need to offer in a lawsuit to make the case for higher pay. We don't know. So that's kind of where things are with that right now. The news out of this past week was that Spangler did go and try to build support for this from County Commission, which is something he said he was going to do. I think he knew he had to make a good, before he goes and files a lawsuit, make a good faith effort with Commission to try to get them on board. But there wasn't a lot of obvious movement in his direction, and more to come.
Yeah,
as they say.
I mean, you mentioned don't know what kind of proof he's going to have to show, but I think that one of the things he's going to have to show is that he needs more people to do the job. And
he needs to be able to hire people to do the job.
Yes, and he is going, hire more people. He's got them budgeted, and has for years had these positions budgeted, but unable to fill them because, in his opinion, the pay is too low. Same, issue faced the Knoxville Police Department, still faces the Knoxville Police Department.
Pretty much every law enforcement agency that we hear from is having trouble filling positions right now.
And the reason, of course, the reason the city had a big tax increase last year was in part, in very big part, to increase pay for police and firefighters, and in order to recruit more people to fill their unfilled positions. So, I mean, you almost have to, you can't. I can't imagine that a part of this is going to, Spangler is going to would have to prove to a judge that the sheriff's office cannot properly do all of the duties it is required to do without the ability to get more people, to hire more people, and
Yep.
that this is vital in order to do that. And so that's a tricky argument to make. So, and like you said, we don't know for sure that's what it's going to, because it's, I don't know if it's not exactly completely uncharted, but nobody's done it here.
Right. We haven't been through, if he ends up going that route, we haven't been through it before. So we will certainly report on each step of the process as it moves along. Okay. So then on Tuesday, City Council met and they considered a resolution on gun safety that was brought to them by some young people, very similar to what we saw with County Commission just a few weeks ago, where they had a different group of young people who brought them a resolution on gun safety, and County Commission did not approve it. But maybe not surprisingly, given what we know about the political orientation of County Commission versus City Council, the issue got a little friendlier reception at City Council.
Yeah, the group that brought the resolution to City Council was the Mayor's Youth Council. That's a group of 16 teenagers from schools that are inside the city limits of Knoxville, and or at least they live inside the city of Knoxville. It's basically one of these things to get people, these young people interested in government and politics and that sort of thing, kind of get them to be active citizens. And you don't hear much about them. They have there are different committees and things like that, but you really don't hear a whole lot about them, very often. But much like the group, the
junior
commissioners. I was about to say youth commissioners, junior commissioners. They were felt compelled after the Covenant School shooting in Nashville where it's a horrific murders that prompted even Governor Lee to call for a special session on gun safety. And in advance of that, the Youth Council asked for a resolution in support of gun safety measures. Now, the county resolution that failed was pretty vague.
Mm-hmm.
Once it was amended, and it was pretty kind of a vague support of doing something. The Mayor's Youth Council was a little more specific. They said not only in support of gun measures, but they talked about having background checks for all gun purchases and eliminating loopholes in those. Now they supported the extreme risk protection order, or as nobody who supports these likes to call the red flag laws, one of those to try to keep firearms out of the hands of people who may at least temporarily be a danger to themselves or others. The laws requiring secure storage, extra funding for school risk assessment teams, these were specifically laid out in the resolution, and it was kind of interesting. They came and gave came to the meeting. They gave their own testimonies. One of the members was Owen Davis. He was a senior at West, and talked about the recent discharge of a firearm at West High School that slightly wounded a teacher, and I talked about his experience that day and the uncertainty and fear that he felt. There was another student, William Mendoza, who's an Honduran immigrant, who talked about how his parents came to this country to escape violence, and here, he's having to deal with it here. And we've had a Joe Nicely, a young lady who's not a teenager. I didn't get how old she is, but she appeared to be about maybe 10. who came and actually spoke about 2 sentences and then went and left. And but they were all basically imploring council and by extension the legislators that they want to influence to do something to make schools safer because they don't feel safe. That's the bottom line. And they did get a good reception. City council members universally praised them for coming forward. They didn't get a unanimous vote, which was kind of an odd thing. They got 6 yes votes. Councilwoman Gwen McKenzie was not there, but the 2 council members abstained. They didn't vote no, but they abstained. And there was Janet Testerman and Lynn Fugit, both of whom said, well, great for you coming forward. We appreciate that, but we're philosophically opposed to city council telling another elected body how to vote and what their decisions ought to be in an official way like that. So they then said, we hope you will go and also contact your the representatives who in the legislature in your districts and talk to them because they're the ones with the power. They're the ones who can actually do something. We can't do anything. So that was that kept it from being there was no opposition, but it wasn't unanimous in that. And so that resolution and will move on, be given to the representatives in the state house and state senate whose constituents include Knoxville residents. And so
and they are going to be hearing from a lot of people probably on all sides of these issues leading up to that August session.
Yeah, and one thing that was kind of interesting is when this came up in front of county commission by the junior commissioners, there were several commissioners. You were there. I mean, I wasn't there, but hey, I read your report. Who raised Second Amendment issues? Mm-hmm. That this would we don't want to do any support anything that would remove constitutional rights or anything like that. Among council members last week, that didn't come up. Yeah, I mean it was kind of like a given that what Janet Testerman termed as common sense gun regulations are okay.
Right.
And
and a lot of these regulations actually exist in other places and have not been found to, I don't think any red flag law has been struck down as unconstitutional, for example.
Yeah, and one thing is the Supreme Court decision in Heller and McDonald, which were the two that really actually made the Second Amendment apply to state laws. The majority opinion, which was written by Scalia, who is not exactly a flaming liberal, or wasn't exactly a flaming liberal, said that no, no right secured by the Constitution is absolute, and the Second Amendment is not absolute.
Right. It left an opening.
There can be laws that theoretically could survive a constitutional challenge. And it's not. I mean, he threw out a couple of examples of things that could, depending on how they're written, still pass muster according to the constitutional test that he did. So,
right.
These laws and we will see on the special session begins on August 21st. Lee, as we said, has been in favor of a red flag law. Sorry, Governor, I know you don't like us to call it that, but that's exactly what it is. And maybe there may be some other proposals come up. given the now the Republican supermajority in the legislature really tried to run away from this when he brought it up at the end of
almost
the last
literally.
Yes.
They went out of session in a hurry.
Yeah. They might have stuck around for another day or two, get a couple more days worth of per diem in Nashville, but they left the Capitol as soon as they possibly could once he made that his intention known about the red flag law. But it's one of those things where I think the public sentiment to do something about gun violence, especially when it comes to schools, is pretty popular. It is not popular among the legislators, and they would just as soon not tick off voters, and they don't really, it's obvious they didn't want to address it, and we don't know to what extent they'll address it during the special session, because once it's in session, they may, there may be the governor may get somebody to advance his bill. If he gets shot down, then chances are that no one other than Democrats would make proposals, and Democrat proposals don't stand much of a chance.
There will be a lot of behind the scenes maneuvering between now and then, and we'll just have to,
as there always is,
see what happens.
And we won't know because it's behind the scenes until the session begins.
But they will have a resolution from City Council saying, please do
yes, they will.
These things for whatever that's worth to them. Real quick, while we're on City Council, let's just follow up on one thing they didn't do this week, because we had talked about this issue previously, but there was a proposal to rezone the old South High building, South High School in South Knoxville, that would have allowed the McNabb Center. It's currently senior housing. It would have allowed the McNabb Center to turn it into a drug treatment facility. And the McNabb Center actually withdrew that from the agenda, basically because they could tell they weren't going to get support for the rezoning, right?
They can count to 5, and they were not able to do that. I think beforehand, the support just wasn't there. For one thing, Tommy Smith, who represents South Knoxville, which is where South High is, obviously, was opposed to it in support of the Lindbergh Forest Neighborhood Association, which said that, well, it's a zoned residential now, it's needs to stay residential. Now, this throws a lot of things, raises a lot of questions. First of all, while the McNabb Center initially said that they would go ahead and buy the building no matter what, apparently that is not going to be the case, that that they're probably not going to go through.
It's one of those things easier to say when you're trying to sell something than actually follow through on.
And so they losing, I believe, is $4 million in a state grant that was going to help pay for this transition, and they're losing that. If they go back to Plan A, because this was actually Plan B. Plan A was to expand its Centerpoint facility on Ballcamp Pike. If they go back and do that, that's would expand the number of beds that are available for drug treatment, and we are in the midst of an opioid crisis, as we all know. But they would have been able to double the expansion if they'd been able to go to South High. So and they may have other options that they explore as well. But it also throws into question what happens to South High, because Rick Dover, who redeveloped it, has been running it as an assisted living facility. It is, and they've as this sale was approaching, they were placing the residents at other assisted living facilities. Only a handful of people still live there, and now the interior of the building is configured for an assisted living type of place with not communal, but not every unit has a bathroom, for example, and stuff. So you can't use it as an apartment complex without going through in and gutting it and reconfiguring it. Remember, this is a school building, so it's not as easy as it might sound to reconfigure. So if it's not going to be an assisted living facility, then what's it going to be? And the answer is there's nothing else, basically not much else you can do with it.
Right. Dover wants to sell it.
He wants to sell it. And one of the things is that they've says he's lost money on it, lost money last year on it. He says, it's not, one of the things is it doesn't, assisted living facilities, nursing homes, are basically geographically dependent. That depends on the people that live nearby to send their relatives or have their relatives move into them. The South High assisted living has a very low number of people who are from South Knoxville who are there, so it's not really been pulling in a lot of locals, and which has made managing it difficult according to Dover's people. So I don't know if that can be changed by a new operator, but somebody may buy it and continue running it as an assisted living facility. I think Dover's pretty intent on selling it, so we'll see. But if that doesn't happen, there's not a whole lot else you can do with the property.
Right.
In a because it's zoned residential use, there aren't any other, I don't think, residential uses other than an assisted living facility that could be used in that building with its current configuration.
Right, without a big investment by somebody to do something. Right, well, more to come there, obviously, but it won't be a drug treatment center. The school system had a couple of interesting items this week. The first was they had a series of public meetings to roll out what they called their strategic plan for their Region 5 schools. If you're wondering, what is a Region 5 school? Well, you may remember that last year when John Reiswick took over as superintendent, he reorganized the district into 5 basically geographically organized regions along school feeder patterns. And so he kind of started with high schools and then took the regions down through all of the middle schools and elementary schools that feed into those high schools. So Region 5 is basically the center city region. It's Austin East and Fulton high schools, and then all of the elementary and middle schools that feed those schools. As you may know, those schools are among the most challenged in lots of ways in the district. They have high percentages of students from low-income backgrounds, high percentages of English language learners, students with disabilities. It's where the majority of the county's black population lives. And these are schools that often struggle with sort of low scores on state tests, that just present sort of kind of every challenge that any school has are more present and more concentrated in those schools. And for that reason, Reiswick's treated the region differently. The other 4 regions are all under the direct supervision of an assistant superintendent for academics. The Region 5 schools are actually under the assistant superintendent for student supports, Jason Myers, who also oversees special education services countywide, English language learning services countywide, kind of a lot of the things that these schools need in particular. And Reiswick promised that they were going to put together a specific, he already has sort of like the broad goals for the district. He has a whole set of sort of programs and committees and so on and so forth that are common across the district. But for Region 5, he said that they were going to take an extra layer of or give them an extra layer of attention and come up with a plan just for those schools. And so that's what they did, and they have rolled that plan out. You can find it on the school system's website if you search for Region 5. And basically, and they presented this in a series of public meetings over the past week. And it essentially is trying to standardize certain kinds of things across all of the schools in the region. So, for example, some of those schools have some academic offerings that others don't. He wants to make sure that all of those schools have high quality academic programs, that they have access to advanced placement classes. They have access. He's talking about expanding something called the International Baccalaureate Program, which is something that right now in Knox County, as the name would suggest, is an international educational model. It actually comes from Europe. But it only exists in Knox County right now at West High School. And so this would make IB programming, as they call it, available in these schools in Region 5 as well, and that they would have sort of dedicated resources for not just special education, but school counselors and just kind of all of the layers of supports that they, a lot of these things are already in these schools, but they want to take a region-wide approach to it and be consistent and make sure, he's kind of talking about it as a clear pathway. Another big part of it is expanding pre-kindergarten offerings in these schools. So a clear pathway for students from pre-kindergarten all the way through high school graduation, where they will kind of have consistent resources, consistent high academic expectations and supports, so that students are identified, relatively early if they need extra help with, say, reading or math or so forth. All of this built toward, and this is in line with what he's trying to do district-wide as well, with the things like the 865 Academy model that we've talked about, where high schools are kind of going to have their own dedicated, career pathways for students to choose from and so forth. So it's taking a lot of things they're doing district-wide, but really giving it extra focus and resources in those Region 5 schools to try to, and this has been sort of a never-ending problem, and this is true in school systems across the country. In areas where you have high concentrations of low-income students, you have all of these issues. There's a whole bunch of things that are sort of co-indicated with poverty, and those include special education needs and so on and so forth. But trying to do this in a comprehensive way, instead of the point that Ryswick made was, in the past, they've kind of approached this on a school-by-school basis. And so, you get your state test results for a few years. One school looks really bad or is in danger of maybe even being taken over by the state. They will do like a school reorganization. Both Austin East and Fulton High School at different points have been through these reorganizations where they kind of like fire, not exactly fire everybody, but they kind of do. Everybody has to reapply they bring in a new principal, everybody has to reapply for their jobs, they bring in new teachers. And he said that they have been successful with that on a school-by-school basis. Ryswick himself actually was the principal at Fulton when it did a reorganization that really did. It brought up graduation rates significantly, it brought up academic achievement, somewhat, and has sustained it. But that these things then tend to, it's like it looks good for a few years and the district kind of shifts its focus elsewhere. And what he wants to do here is make sure that they have consistency. A lot of this has to do with consistency of effort, messaging, resources at every level, from pre-K into those elementary schools, into the middle schools, and then up through the high schools. All of this aimed at basically trying to take the most challenged kids in the district at the most challenged schools in the district and get them on what the school system calls a path to success, that by the time they graduate from high school, they should be ready to either go on to post-secondary education or go out and get a not just a job, but a good job, a well-paid job that they've maybe been prepared for through their programs in schools, enlist in the military. Those are the kind of things that they want those students ready to do when they graduate from high school. So we will see. There was a question at one of the meetings I went to on it. where somebody said, why should we believe you this time? Like every 5 years, somebody shows, or some new superintendent or whatever shows up at these persistently challenged schools and says, here's how we're going to solve these problems. And then 5 years later, somebody's back there again saying, here's how we're going to solve these problems. And, Ryswick said, good question. And we're going to do it by data reporting, by transparency, by being open with the community about what we are achieving and where we're not achieving. And I guess we'll just see.
One thing that's notable about that is, it's not any, he's divided the county, the school system into several of these regions, where the feeder schools and the high schools are grouped together. And, this one is no really, in some ways, is no different from those, from Farragut or Halls and Powell, those areas. The real difference is the need. I mean, it's a lot of these, and each of the other regions will have programs tailored to their needs. But the one thing that makes Region 5 stand out is the persistent poverty and challenges that brings. And so while it's getting while this region is getting a lot of extra attention, it's not unique attention. I mean, it's just because the needs are so much greater in these communities than they are perhaps in others. Although the others have needs of their own.
Absolutely.
There will be so it's not like they're singling out Region 5 for tailor-made programs. It's just that Region 5 has a lot of issues that their students have to overcome.
Right. Yes. There are no problems in Region 5 schools that aren't present in other schools all across the county. Yeah. It is, as you say, just the concentration, the density of all of those needs. And, this is the perennial challenge for public schools. It really is. How do you address the needs of the, sort of lowest income people, often coming from homes where, there probably isn't a parent who has a college education. In a lot of cases, homes where there's only one parent. In some cases, homes where there isn't, or there aren't any parents. They're being raised by, family, friends, a lot of instability. All of those things just make the challenges in the classroom that much harder. And the school system, it is a challenge, but of course, as people like to say, there's also an opportunity there, because the school system is graded and judged and ranked by the state on its overall performance on various metrics, including attendance, including performance on state tests and so forth. Well, all of those numbers are much worse at these Region 5 schools. And so if you want to look at where could Knox County, the district as a whole, make the most dramatic gains in raising its overall district-wide numbers, well, these schools are where they could do that because, for example, we talk about the third grade reading test, which I'm going to say something else about in a minute, but that everybody focuses on as this very important metric. We know that countywide, typically only about 40% of third graders test as, quote, what the state considers proficient on that test, which sounds like a low number, but in the Region 5 schools, it's 22%. So it's half of what the actual district-wide number is. If you could get those Region 5 schools up to 30%, you would bring up that district-wide number considerably. Yeah. So there are also, there's ways that the county, if these things work, if they can over time, move those very difficult to move indicators, that'll benefit those students and those schools, obviously, but would also benefit the whole district in a lot of ways. On that third grade reading test, I did want to mention, we had an article just this week. We've talked about this in the past, that the state legislature passed a law a couple of years ago, basically saying that any students who don't score proficient, any third graders who don't score proficient on that test are going to be subject to either being held back or having to go to mandatory summer school, take mandatory tutoring during fourth grade, and then they could still be subject to being held back in fourth grade if they don't show adequate progress on their reading scores there. There was a lot of back and forth about this during the legislative session. There was hope from the local school district here and districts across the state that the legislature would really revisit that law and maybe leave those decisions about whether or not to retain students at the local level. That did not happen. They did make one small change to that law, allowing not just the state TCAP test, but another benchmark test to be used in those measurements. However, they didn't get that law passed in time to affect this current year's students. So even that relatively small change won't take effect until next year, which means that today, May 19th, the day that we are taping this, today is the day that the state is supposed to release this year's third grade reading scores back to the district, and then the district can report those back to the families. So just right now, in the middle of May, the week before school ends, parents are going to find out whether their student is facing either being held back or having to go to these mandatory classes that start in June and take up the whole month of June. They're going to run from June 5th to June 25th. Just this week is when they're all finding this out. And so we had a story this week that you can see on our website talking to the school system about how they were preparing for this. They have to make sure they have adequate numbers of classes and teachers and everything available. One thing and these are going to be running at 29 elementary schools. So they're anticipating a lot. There are 4,400 students in this year's third grade class, finishing third grade this week. If 60% of them, as has been the norm, don't hit that proficient mark, it's going to mean about 2,700 third graders countywide who will be subject to either the summer classes or fourth grade tutoring or both. And they're just finding it out for sure now. Now, they've encouraged parents all year to plan for this, but it's been a little bit weird because they've been encouraging them to plan for this at the same time that also there's been all this discussion about, is this even going to take effect? Is it going to change? Well, it didn't change. It is still in effect. And now they have to juggle all of this. One thing they've had to do is restrict enrollment in their summer camps to other grade levels. People who maybe want their kindergarten or first grader or second grader to get some extra reading help over the summer. A lot of people were turned away because they had to reserve, they only had so many teachers available, and they had to reserve capacity for these third graders. And so we will be following up on that in future weeks. I'm especially interested in finding out how many students are actually just going to be retained in third grade. The district has said it's going to work very hard to minimize that number. They would really prefer to not retain students, but the only way that can happen is then if they take these other, available remediations. There may be some parents who just say, I don't want to do that. I'll just let them repeat third grade. I mean, who knows? But we will follow up and see the impact of that. But it's been interesting to watch this because there was so much talk all year about, well, the legislature is going to fix it. They're going to fix it somehow. They told us they're going to fix it. They really didn't. They honestly barely touched this law. And so now it's taking effect in the form that really nobody, the Knox County School Board made very clear that this was not how they wanted to do this. But, when the legislature passes a law, it turns out that you still have to do it whether you want to follow it.
Yeah, it's the law of the land. Now, one thing that you mentioned that in our story, and we've had previous coverage on our website, which we have been remiss so far today. I don't think we've mentioned that our website is at CompassKnox.com.
CompassKnox.com, where you can read about all of these things.
Absolutely. And you can, there's subscription information there. You can get our daily newsletter and all kinds of fun stuff. Anyway, wanted to throw that in there because sometimes
toot our own horn a little bit.
Sometimes we get carried away talking about what we've covered, but then we forget to tell people how they can actually read that coverage.
That's right. Good point. All right. Well, another thing that happened this past week, Thursday was the deadline for candidates in this year's City of Knoxville races to submit their qualifying nominating petitions. And so, Scott, who is running for office in the City of Knoxville this year?
Everybody. That's not quite that, but it was funny. The 25 people had, as of before noon yesterday, 25 people had taken out petitions. A couple of them had already said they weren't going to be running, so really 23, possible. It wound up being 18. Not everybody turned in who took out petitions, turned them in. So it's a pretty heavy ballot for an election where you have an incumbent mayor.
Mm-hmm.
And incumbent, and these are this, and so the mayor, city council members who are running have all served one term. They get another term if they get reelected. They typically don't receive a whole lot of opposition, especially in the mayor's office. Mayor O'Hara, when she ran for reelection in 2015, did have someone on the ballot, but they had already withdrawn and got a handful of votes. So she really didn't have opposition in the primary. Bill Haslam in 2007 had token opposition. So it's and Victor Ashe would always have one person run against him. And the one thing about a mayor's race in the city of Knoxville is in the primary, if the mayor gets a majority of votes, with 50% plus one, as they like to say, I don't know why they don't just say a majority, but hey, if the mayor gets a majority of the votes, or a candidate, doesn't have to be the mayor, any candidate gets a majority of the votes in the primary, is automatically the mayor. They don't have to run. They don't have to have a runoff in the general election. Same goes for the municipal judge race, which we'll talk about in just a second. Doesn't go that way for the city council races if they're only there are, no matter what, the top finisher can get 75% of the vote. They still have to go off and run off in the general election
against the second place.
Against the second place finisher. Anyway, so we'll run through the candidates real quickly. We're not going to dwell on them a whole lot.
We will have plenty of time for coverage of all of these races individually over the next few months.
Absolutely, but just so you know, for now, Mayor Indy Concannon, of course, is running for re-election. She's got 4 candidates who are running against her, which is really unusual for a mayor seeking re-election. Constance Every, who is a police reform advocate, I think is probably she's best
community
known. Community activist.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Tallman, who is a mortgage lender. Barack I believe is how he pronounces his name. It's spelled E-R. And Richard Lawhorn, both of whom are business people, are running for mayor as well. So those 5 candidates are going to be on the ballot in the primary. For city council races, seat A, Lynn Fugit is the incumbent. She's running for re-election against Darren Worsham and Cameron Brooks. In seat B, which was Janet Testerman, is there currently. She decided not to run for re-election, and Debbie Helsley, who ran for county mayor last year, and R. Bentley Marlowe, who is a pretty outspoken and interesting builder and developer of historic properties in Mechanicsville, is running. Seat C is going to have an interesting dynamic. We've got Amelia Parker, who has been basically set herself up as kind of the loyal opposition, I guess, as she frequently clashes with the mayor's office on issues
from the progressive end of the spectrum.
From progressive of the spectrum, yes. She's running against Tim Hill, who's a developer and chair of the Planning Commission, and Matthew Best, who is the executive director of the Change Center. District 5, the folks in District 5 have an easy thing.
That's me, by the way. I live in District 5.
You live in, the current representative of District 5, as you well know, is Charlie Thomas, and he's unopposed.
And he was also Oh no, he was not unopposed last time. He did have opposition when he ran the first time.
Yes,
That's right.
Yes, he did. But yeah, no one is running against him. So he's the only candidate who can just go about his life and not worry about things, I guess, unless I don't think there's any way for anybody to, unless there's a bizarre write-in campaign. Anyway,
people, in the 5th district, we're pretty easygoing folks. I think people are just kind of like, all right, Charlie's doing all right. Seems okay,
Yeah, and Charlie's a little that way himself.
Charlie is a little bit easy. Yes,
he's very easygoing.
Charlie's personality, I think, probably does actually match the district pretty well.
And then we're going to have the municipal judge race. And this is unusual. John Rawson has been the municipal judge since the mid-'80s. He was appointed to replace a judge, won in his first campaign. And since then, since the mid-'80s, he's had one election in which he's had opposition. 2003. So it's 20 years later, and all of a sudden, he's got 3 opponents.
It's like people suddenly discovered this job was out there.
Yeah, it's the most in-demand part-time job in the city. Anyway, and it is part-time. It's the municipal judge does parking tickets and speeding tickets that are written by city police officers when they choose to charge you with a violation of city law rather than state law. Things like expired tags, city codes violations, those kinds of things. It is a part-time job, and so whoever holds that job can also maintain their private practice as well. But no one has run against Rawson in 20 years, and now he's got of course they're all attorneys. And Mary Ward, Tyler Kavinas, and Andrew Beamer are his the opponents. We will have to find out a lot more about them as we move on, as we will several of the other candidates, and we'll be looking into their backgrounds, interviewing them, getting our readers kind of up to speed on who they can vote for if they live in the city and vote in the city. And now you mentioned the field is almost set. Mm-hmm. It is almost set. It will become official this Thursday. The deadline to withdraw is noon on Thursday, 25th. So any of these candidates who decides they don't want me to mangle their name on our podcast or otherwise decide not to run, they have until then to pull out.
Right. So we will have the actual names that are going to be on the ballot set as of this coming Thursday.
Right. And this is the maximum.
Right. Nobody else can get on the ballot.
Nobody else can get on the ballot. So there may be fewer, but there won't be more.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, and as you say, we don't need to go into it in any detail now because we're going to have plenty of time to talk about it. But it is interesting to me to have contested races in almost every office. As you say, District 5 is the exception there, but having that many candidates running for mayor. Now, the interesting question there really for Kincannon, I think, is can she it doesn't really matter how many people are running against her. What matters is, can she get over 51% of the vote? Can she get 51% of the vote or more in the primary? Because if she does, she'll be reelected. And so those other 4 candidates together, can they stitch together enough votes to collectively get over 51%? Because if they do, then whichever one of them finishes highest, even if they only get 17% of the vote or whatever,
Right.
would then go on the ballot for the runoff with Kincannon.
Yeah,
I guess I'm just kind of assuming that the incumbent mayor comes out of a 5-candidate field as one of the top 2 finishers going into the general. Maybe that won't even happen, but that's the most likely scenario.
It is the most likely scenario, and the question is how big is the vote that the other 4 are going to split up? Like you said, one of them doesn't have to get close to 50 as long as all 4 of them together get more than 50% of the vote.
Right.
And then the top finisher moves on, and that's an odd thing because you don't know who that top finisher would be. That top finisher might be someone who would fare very well in a general election against Mayor Kincannon or another candidate, and they might not be.
Right. It could be somebody who maxes out their vote in the primary at 22% of the vote, and that's all they're going to get.
Yeah. The 4 candidates together, have 53% of the vote. The top finisher has 20%, but all of the other people who vote for the mayor instead of that person who gets the 20%. I mean, that's their ceiling. So it's we won't know that for a long time, but the campaign's going to be interesting. We've got a varied candidate pool. There are going to be some clear choices, I think, in most of the races, with the exception of the 5th district, of course. And so it'll be fun. There are a lot of candidates that there are several first-time candidates that we'll get to know for the first time as they move forward. And that's always fun. It's always interesting to talk to people who are getting involved. They've decided, okay, I have to get involved in local government, and they run for office, and that's it's fun to watch that process.
Yep. And I guess I should make a slight correction to myself. I said Kincannon would need 51% of the vote. So before Chris Davis with the Election Commission or anyone else calls in to correct me, she needs 50% plus 1 vote. She doesn't actually need 51% of the vote. She just needs 1 vote over 50% in order to not have to go to the general election, which I'm just going to guess is the way she would prefer things to go.
Oh yeah, of course she would. And John Rawson wants the same way because judgeship works the same way.
Right.
50% plus 1 gets you into office without a runoff. So.
All right. Well, Seth, why don't we go ahead and take a quick break here, and then we will come back and answer some reader questions. Okay, we are back, and we are to the question and answer portion of the podcast, where every week we were just talking about subscribers and how you can get a subscription at CompassKnox.com. If you do subscribe, you can also join our subscriber-only Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy. And every week, or most weeks, some weeks we forget, but we go on there and we ask if there are any particular issues people would like to hear more about on the podcast. And we had a couple of suggestions this week, including one from our very own producer here, Seth Barber of Barbarian Productions. And Seth, instead of us repeating your question, since we have you here, why don't you go ahead and ask it?
Well, I'll start with, to be fair, I am a subscriber. I pay for a subscription.
And we appreciate it.
It is, I'm just like the rest of you subscribers out there, so my question is just as valid as yours. Basically, we have this conversation, I suppose, that UT is looking at doing an entertainment district between Thompson and Neyland, including bars and restaurants and smaller venues and the big hotel and all that kind of stuff. And so, I'm curious what the talks are. It's very early in the process, I understand, but what the talks are, what they're really looking at wanting to do down there. But then there's like some of the more obvious stuff as far as, used to be a dry campus, and then the stadiums were allowed to have it, and how's that going to work with alcohol on that? As a person who had worked on the Strip and what was the closest to any nightlife to campus in the past, it was not a fun place to be an employee or a business owner. It's a hard business selling alcohol to college students because they're notoriously cheap. And when UT does stuff, it's never cheap. So if they're leasing space to a bar, I assume it's going to be quite expensive, and how that's going to work. And then there's, we've talked, you guys have talked before about how eminent domain issues and stuff like that, and UT's ability to expand as they really wish when they go across the river with this new bridge, for example, which they are wanting to incorporate into this plan. And so part of it to me, it's like, at what point does UT become its own city inside the city of Knoxville, inside Knox County, and being theoretically the smallest footprint municipality, but having really the most authority to do with what they want. And that's kind of the, and then I go into my whole joke about, going to the UT grocery store, living in my UT apartment, going to the UT nightclub. And
are we headed for a new company town?
Right.
Model?
It turns into those old coal mining towns where, you don't even get a paycheck. They just take everything that you spend.
You get vol bucks.
Right, which already exist. But anyway, that was kind of the premise of the question I was kind of going towards.
Well, I have an answer for you, Seth.
All of them? All of the answers?
Most. I think most of them.
That's why I like you, Scott.
There is this misconception that UT is a dry campus. It is far from a dry campus. And not just Neyland Stadium and Thompson Bowling Arena and the baseball, Lindsey Nelson Stadium and those venues. One of the things is that there's an alcohol policy that you can go to. It's in the student handbook. You can look at it online.
Well, when I was a student, I remember going through orientation, and they told me there's no alcohol on campus, and you are considered a vessel. And so, as a leaving campus to go consume and then coming back to my dorm, technically I was bringing alcohol on campus because it was in my body. That was back in the aughts.
I was about to say that was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Alcohol is, you still can have it in your dorm or your residence hall. That's still a no. Or fraternity house or sorority house or anything like that.
Yes, but fraternities never have alcohol in their
No,
houses.
they don't, because it's against the rules.
That's right.
Anyway, but we're going to talk about the rules and not the exceptions. But no, alcohol is allowed on campus. It is allowed not only at the sporting events, but most other places on campus. Lots of other public places. You can university units can do that if the business school wants to hold a reception for its donors and faculty. They can do so and have alcohol served. Their student groups can do that as well. Now, obviously, they have to follow state laws, so no one under 21 can access it. But if there is a student group, they can find a location on campus that is allowed and get a special event permit to serve alcohol. Now, there are some stipulations with this. Gotta have other things besides alcohol to serve. You gotta have things to eat. Can only be consumed at that location. Has to get approved at the vice chancellor level ahead of time. Usually a lot of pretty good space ahead of time. But that's what's going to happen. Private people can do that. If Compass wants to have a reception for its subscribers, we could rent out space at UT. Used to, they had a list of places you could go, like the McClung Museum. You could rent out portions of it. You could rent out the fourth floor of Ayers Hall, which is would be kind of a neat venue, I would think. But you could rent out those places and do the same thing. Again, you have to have somebody come in to serve who is licensed and all that, and they do that. Now, for a fixed place, where it's done over and over again, like Neyland Stadium, you can do that as well. What UT would have to do is, now UT can't sell it directly. They can't get a license to sell beer or liquor, but they can contract with someone to anywhere on just about anywhere on campus, and that's what would be done here. I would apparently it would be done here. As you said, the proposal is there's a hotel and entertainment complex basically proposed for south of Neyland Stadium. Off the southwest corner of the stadium to be a 13-story or 12-story hotel where the very top of it you could peek down into the stadium. I'm not sure how much you would be able to see, but you would be able to see something inside the stadium. And then the top of the parking, there's a parking garage that runs along the south end zone of Neyland Stadium over to almost to Thompson-Boling Arena. And what they were talking about doing is topping it off with kind of an entertainment center, and that would be restaurants, perhaps bars, perhaps space for tailgating, that sort of thing. And oh, by the way, according to this alcohol policy, you can tailgate on university property and have alcohol, and it's no big deal. So, just saying, that's the way the policy reads. Now, I don't know how that works in the real world because I haven't been tailgating in about 30 years. But hey.
And also, let's be honest, you're not too inclined to go and tailgate at a UT game specifically.
For
those of you sitting at home, Scott is sitting here wearing an Alabama ball cap right now.
That third week in October.
I don't know what gives you that idea, Roll Tide. Anyway, this new cap for the G10 garage, as they call it, south of Neyland Stadium. It's kind of a nebulous concept at this point. One of the things that they're doing is they're issuing a what's called a request for information. They're basically looking to see if there are firms out there who think it might be feasible to do this whole entertainment center, and make no bones about it. UT is looking at this as a not necessarily a thing for students. They're looking at it as a city amenity. They're looking at it, and they mentioned this in the announcement that they made, that it's going to be like Market Square, like parts of Bearden, like the Old City. It's going to be like Turkey Creek. Of course, won't be like Turkey Creek, but it's going to be an entertainment center for the community at large. So, yes, it would be in direct competition with the Strip and the Old City and downtown Knoxville primarily, because that's where UT students go for their entertainment purposes. So it'll be, we don't know yet how big and how extensive this is going to be, but that's a pretty decent sized parking garage there.
I'd read somewhere they were comparing it to the Battery around Brave Stadium in Atlanta.
Yeah.
If anyone out there is familiar with that, I haven't been personally, but I actually was curious enough. I pulled the map up of it, and it's a couple of blocks of, bars, restaurants, shopping and stuff like that. That's off of one corner of that new stadium. That was it, Truist Park, I believe.
Yeah, I was actually just there a couple of weeks ago, and one particular thing about that area is that because of where it is, there's not a lot else right around it. Certainly nothing else you can walk to, because it's kind of surrounded. You know what Atlanta sprawl is like. It's surrounded by various kinds of interstates and so on and so forth. And so having that there gives people a place to go before or after games or whatever, without having to go and get back in their car and drive a zillion miles or whatever. I think a difference here would be that we already have in Knoxville, like lots of places that people already go before and after games. And this is obviously, UT trying to bring more of that on to campus.
I mean, to me, it reads, this is a revenue generating venture that they're looking into.
For the athletics department in particular, right? They're the ones who are overseeing it.
Yeah, the athletics department is doing it. Now, what they're talking about doing, and they're doing this same process with 3 new residence halls that are going to be built. Going to do a public-private partnership, and what means is they're going to do a ground lease, at least for the hotel, and I don't know how you do a ground lease for the top floor of a parking garage. attorneys are going to make out just fine in this.
UT Law School students.
Anyway, but usually there's a ground lease, and the developer actually, the UT owns the property and retains ownership in the property. The developer actually owns the building, and the developer manages the building. The developer makes, they take in all the revenues. Now they share some with the university. They put some in their pockets, and then they put some into the operations. And so that's that would be the model where let's say Barbarian Development Corporation ends up getting awarded this, then Barbarian Development would build, own, and operate the hotel, for example.
Right. I bring in tenants either as renters for the hotel or a tenant for the coffee shop in the ground floor.
Right.
And I take in lease or nightly room rate rentals, and then I pay either you
split the profits with UT.
And that would be the agreement on the ground lease.
Yeah.
Okay. So UT would be UT Athletics specifically is a landlord long term in this process once it gets out.
Yeah, that would be
probably.
There's
a lot of legal hoops to go through.
You can do all kinds of weird legal things, but yeah, UT, a unit of the University of Tennessee would actually own the the ground, and then the developer would run everything, take in all the revenues, split the profits with the UT entity, that is the UT unit that is overlooking. It's probably going to be the athletics department. The athletics department, they've got a vested interest kind of in doing this. Got this hotel right by Neyland Stadium. They can bring in recruits. They can bring in, and they have to pay some hotel to house recruits when they come in for recruiting.
And then on game days, or the night
game days, of course,
put the team in a hotel, and they could just now put their team in their own hotel.
They could put their team in their own hotel. They could not and rent those out for an exorbitant rate to
I'd pay a couple bucks
fans
to be right there and back there because now I can drink right there.
Yeah. Because,
sounds like a win.
The UT football team says not spilling any state secrets at the Crowne Plaza downtown Knoxville, so they could still go to the Crowne Plaza, but UT would get all of or at least half of the revenues from renting out these hotel rooms at a huge rate because it is right next to Neyland Stadium. Now they're also talking about putting condominiums in, and so I would imagine that there would be one or two boosters who would pay dearly for a condominium. Right next to
probably not to live in full time, but just to be able to come and hang out at games and other fun times of year. What
other events they might have? Because you're right by the stadium. You've got a view of the river. It's it'd be a great place.
And if you had a condo, you could also probably then Airbnb it for people who were coming to.
God forbid.
There's all sorts of possible things that could spin out of this.
And then you've got and the hotel could serve other parts of the university, not just the athletic department. They could have conferences, academic conferences and meetings, and guests of the university for academic departments could stay there. So I mean, there's there are legitimate reasons to do it. Other schools have small hotels on their campuses. I think I mentioned this before. We talked about this. I stayed at the one at the University of Florida several years ago. So.
But to me, it brings up a couple other issues. Is campus is consistently underhoused for their student body, and they're building a significant housing project. And I guess they're not paying out of pocket for this housing project as far as a hotel being housing. But it's like we don't have enough housing for students that live there, but we're going to build a building which is essentially housing and then rent it out at exorbitant rates.
They're trying to build housing.
They're actually building, like I mentioned earlier, they're building 3 new residence halls.
Right.
2 of them are specifically for freshmen. One of them is actually for going to be open to upperclassmen. Typically, upperclassmen want to move off campus, at least in the old days. They wanted to move off campus as soon as possible, get out there on their own and where it's quieter, where they can study harder. Now upperclassmen students are wanting to stay on campus. So one of these is going there. You talk about, they talked about the the expansion across the river. If UT goes through with that, have more residence halls across the river. Especially if the pedestrian bridge goes in, I think that'll be a slam dunk that there will be at least one or two UT owned, and they'll probably do it the same way with this public-private partnership. And all these are, there's a lot coming online. Plus, remember, we've got all those apartments coming in on Cumberland Avenue, which are not university apartments, but you can. If you fall off the top floor, you fall onto the University of Tennessee campus, in essence. So there are a lot of units getting ready to come online, but they're not ready yet. I mean, it'll be in the next couple of years.
Right.
So both UT and the private sector are moving toward addressing the student housing shortage, which is part of the larger, broader Knoxville and Knox County housing shortage. So.
But I do think, Seth, to your point about, kind of doing this whole area that, as Scott said, is not really going to be primarily aimed at students. It does get into sort of broader concerns and critiques that are certainly not new of higher education. Particularly, big state schools with big football programs and so forth. We've heard this for years, of course, that, the university cares more about the football program than it does about, the history program.
Well, my complaint's always been my concern has always been that the city at large cares more about what the university wants and needs, because it's such a huge impact on the economy as well as housing and all the other stuff. Is that, yes, the university is very important to the city of Knoxville, but at what point does the population of Knoxville exceed the need to be so catering to the university? Like, I grew up in Wisconsin. We have University of Madison, which there's only two things in that town: the state seat for government and that university. Everything revolves around those two things. At what point does Knoxville outgrow the university of being its core? Because I always compare it to, like, you go to Atlanta, Georgia Tech is there. It's not Georgia Tech and Atlanta's attached to it. It is Georgia Tech's just tucked in there.
And Knoxville's is sort of, I would say, more intermediate. Because like the city, it is not just a college town, right? In some ways, it's sort of barely a college town apart from the area right around the university. When I first moved here in the mid-'90s, I was kind of surprised at how much it didn't feel like a college town. I expected there to seem, apart from game days, I expected there to be more of a presence than there was. That has shifted a little bit. UT, the other thing that's happened, I mean, UT has expanded their campus footprint. But they've also moved themselves off campus. They have presence downtown. They have some facilities. They have some over in the Mechanicsville area. Mm-hmm. They've kind of dispersed more into the community. So in some ways, I feel UT is more visible in Knoxville now than it used to be, even though the city has grown. And the university does not dominate Knoxville either economically or population-wise or in any other way. But it remains very important. I mean, I think most cities would rather have the flagship state campus than not. It brings a lot of different assets, amenities, and including just the population of people who come to work there. Think about all the faculty members that we have who are here.
Those are high-paying jobs.
Those are high-paying jobs. Yeah, it really, and like our nonprofit sector, like it's probably hard to find a nonprofit in town that doesn't have a University of Tennessee person on their board somewhere. Yeah. And so it has a real presence that I think the city sort of has to pay attention to. But as you say, like as it becomes more than just quote unquote, just an educational institution, as it becomes sort of like a 365-day a year, entertainment complex, which sounds like that's what they're talking about with it. I guess it may not be literally 365 days a year, but it sounds like something that would be active a lot more than just on game weekends.
Yeah, I think 365 sounds pretty much what I read into what they proposed. Yeah, to your point, Knoxville's closer to Atlanta, the Atlanta Georgia Tech end of the spectrum, than it is the Oxford Ole Miss end of the spectrum, where there is literally a town square and the University of Mississippi, and that's about it.
Or like Penn State, where I went to school, where if you don't know, the local town is just named State College.
Yes,
that's what it is. Yeah,
yeah. So it is a little bit more at that end. Although obviously, Georgia Tech's a little smaller school and not much, but it's a little smaller, I think. And then Atlanta's a much larger city, so it's. Georgia Tech is a smaller part of Greater Atlanta than UT is of Knoxville, but and one thing is, you were talking about how the city kowtows to UT. That's a fairly recent phenomenon. Not that the city didn't want to cater to UT, but UT had their leadership pretty much held the city in disdain. They really wanted to be an island. And not be affected by the city. Of course, then they tried to grow, and they had these. This whole, all of a sudden, people were up in arms because they were wanting to tear down historic buildings in Fort Sanders and things like that. And
and I think the other thing that happened was as downtown. I think that UT, say 20 years ago, didn't necessarily see that much advantage in being in Knoxville, but as downtown redeveloped and has become this very lively and desirable place in all sorts of ways, I think that UT has, and yes, there's been successive changes of several changes of leadership at UT in the intervening decades. UT has come to see Knoxville as an asset, that they're not just bringing people to UT, they're bringing them to Knoxville, they're bringing them to East Tennessee, they're bringing them to the urban wilderness and sort of all of the other things that are available here. And so, I think you're right that there is a closer relationship in a lot of ways, but that doesn't mean that there aren't tensions. And, I guess from the strictly city operations standpoint, as long as they get their sales tax, they probably don't care whether it's whether that dollar's spent on campus or on Market Square. But from a sort of like civic, revitalization and keeping things vital and whatever, obviously the city does have an interest in there being that activity that happens on campus doesn't only happen on campus, that the whole city, the whole community benefits from it. And that's where you might see some tension around something like this.
Yeah. And, especially, this entertainment district, if you want to call it that, which actually they are, the Neyland Entertainment District. It is could end up being a direct competition with Cumberland Avenue Strip, where all these new apartment buildings that are going in. Remember, they're going to depend a lot on ground floor retail as well, and restaurants and bars and things like that. So it'll be direct competition with the Strip still, and downtown, because a lot of UT students will go downtown. So a lot of them live downtown now. And so it would be, and people who come to, remember this is supposed to be for, people who come to game day and people who, other people who come to Knoxville for whatever reason and stay in this hotel. They would otherwise go downtown for the most part. If you want to look at the Strip as being mostly for students, downtown is for students and adults, at whatever age. And they would otherwise go downtown for entertainment, and here they might not have. So there will be some tension there as this moves forward.
To your point, Jesse, is that if the city stance is they really care about those tax dollars, well, this could potentially devalue some of the Market Square properties or some of the Gay Street properties, not directly, but over if it continues the way the university seems to be pushing it, that this now takes over as one of the main places where people go to hang out at night instead of going to a Market Square. And then we start losing tenants on Market Square and we have to lower rents. And then over time, those things come down and, maybe the sales tax stays about even, but long term, we could have a property tax loss from it.
Yeah, right. There's all sorts of things that could happen. And I think we're seeing UT embark on several different interesting ventures, thinking also about their turn toward wanting to expand their virtual online offerings. For example, UT is under Randy Boyd as president. UT is going through, I think, a real sort of reevaluation of how it does lots of different things and is open to lots of these public-private partnerships like you're talking about. And I understand I hear a certain amount of, maybe fear is overstating it, but concern, let's say, among a lot of faculty members, for example, about lots of these efforts. Yeah. To what degree do all of these efforts, or any of them, support the traditional mission of the university, and to what degree do they potentially dilute it in one way or another? And I think that that is a tension that has been there for a long time, but is certainly going to be exacerbated in a lot of ways by lots of the new and interesting things that UT is exploring right now. Yeah,
it does. I think that the concern that a lot of people have is that this isn't UT's mission. It is not UT's mission to run an entertainment center, and they look at that and think, well, they're going to build a hotel there. Well, you could build a new lab there, classroom building or dormitory or whatever. Same with the parking garage. Why don't you top it off with a classroom building? Why don't, or whatever. So, that the benefits of increased revenues, for example, that would come into the university through these public-private partnerships, don't do enough to support the university's mission to justify putting the resources into that. And I think that that's a very traditional view of academia, and it's one that UT is kind of entering into a brave new world on that. All these public-private partnerships where you're going to have multiple entities who could be owning these buildings on campus and managing the buildings on campus. It's at arm's length from UT and UT's administration. So it'll be something that bears close attention over the coming years to see how this is actually supporting or changing UT.
Yep. Well, lots of what ifs and remains to be seens, but
that's kind of our businesses.
That's right. It's a lot interesting question. So thank you, Seth, for the question and the chance to talk about that. Well, let's look ahead to the coming week. We do have a couple of things on the calendar. County Commission, which held its work session this past Monday, is holding its monthly voting meeting this coming Monday, and I don't know whether Sheriff Spangler will return again so I don't know if there will be further discussion of that particular issue at this meeting. If not, the agenda overall is sort of light, so it might not be a super exciting meeting, but we will go to it regardless and let you know. And then on Tuesday, the Sports Authority is meeting.
Yeah, the Sports Authority is meeting on Tuesday. Most of the sexy work is done. They're going, now that they've got all the agreements in place to build the stadium, issued going through the bond issue. There'll probably be some discussion on minority and woman-owned businesses having contracts with in the construction, because the next round of subcontracts being put out there now. They are behind on their meeting their goal of 17% being disadvantaged business enterprises having 17% of the value of the construction contracts going to those businesses, and they're hoping to be able to add those as the smaller contracts are gradually let out. And they're all probably, also, and moving forward, it's going to be kind of like that. They'll be talking about those kinds of things. They'll be talking about construction updates as things get going. So that's where you'll probably find out if there are delays, and those kinds of things would be at Sports Authority meetings. But you don't know that in advance till you find out when everybody else finds out there, when they get a report from the contractors doing the work. The only other big thing coming down the pike is there still needs to be an agreement between the Sports Authority and the Gym Community Development Group, which is building the two residential projects in the immediately outside the stadium. So they still have to do that. They still have to have that agreement. But other than that, and that's not coming this week that I'm aware of. So they haven't put out their agenda yet, but I've not heard that is ready yet.
Okay. And then the only other thing coming this week, which we already mentioned, is that the withdrawal deadline for city candidates is Thursday. And so after this coming Thursday, we will actually have a set ballot. All right. Well, I think that about does it for this week. You got anything else?
I'm exhausted, man.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's Friday. It's the end of the week.
Even if we had something, I think I'm too tired to talk about it. Kidding. We would talk until we dropped if we needed to bring you the news and information
Let's
that you need.
hope that never becomes necessary.
No.
Seth, thank you for your production work. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we will be back to talk to you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.